Welcome to Just Talk Funerals with me, Jason Threadgold.
And me, Nicola Threadgold.
Just Talk Funerals is all about the funeral industry, the people that work alongside us, and an insight into what we do.
We will have some special guests along the way, sharing their experiences and how their professions overlap with what we do.
So get yourselves comfy, grab yourselves a cuppa, and let's get into today's episode of
Just Talk Funerals.
Hi there, and welcome to our episode of Just Talk Funerals. I've got with me today Nicola Threadgold, and we're just going to be having a little bit of a chat about Nicola, what she's done in the past, and how we work together within the industry. So, hello, Nicola. Nice to see you.
Hi.
Okay, my first question for you today is,
Yep.
It's taken me a while to put these together, so bear with me.
Okay.
So, you've had a really diverse career before coming into the funeral industry.
Yes.
Can you share for the listeners a little bit about your journey and what led you to this industry?
Okay, so if I go back to, obviously, I went to sixth form college back in the sort of mid-80s. And from there, I left college and really I didn't want to pursue any more education. So it was, mum and dad said, right, you need to get a job, Nicola. And I went to work for H. Samuel, the jewellers. I got a Christmas job. And do you know what? The world of work really opened my eyes because at college I wasn't really academic. I struggled. But going into work, I found my niche, and I really wanted to get involved in every aspect of that business. I started to work really hard, and before I knew it, they took me on as a permanent member of the team. And then from there, I worked my way up into management, which at that time, sort of in the 90s, it was really hard for females to get into management. And through a lot of perseverance and, working hard, I managed to get into management. So that was a great sort of start for me. From there, I then moved on to another part of retail, and I went to work for a company called Salisbury's, who sold handbags, and there was suitcases and travel goods and things like that. And I was actually a manager, branch manager, in a city. And I thoroughly enjoyed that because, again, it took me onto that next step of the ladder. I'd got more managerial experience, so I was more accountable. And again, I enjoyed that. But what was really bizarre was where I was working at the time, which was in Hull, I used to walk past a recruitment agency. And again, at that time, recruitment agencies were coming into the fore. They were extremely busy because businesses were realising that taking on a recruitment agency rather than recruiting for themselves was a really good idea. And one day I just popped into this recruitment agency and I said, actually, what do you do? Because I just like the setup of everything. And they told me a bit about it and they said, well, actually, we do have a role that's coming up if you're interested. So I applied for this role, and it was working, the recruitment company was Manpower, who were known all over the UK and actually nationally and worldwide. So I went for this interview to be a major accounts manager in Grimsby, as it was at the time. And I got the role. But do you know what? I was absolutely scared stiff of this role because it really took me out my comfort zone. I was working with contracts with like BT, Birdseye, and getting really involved into the nitty-gritty of the recruitment, the management side, and I'd got people under me. But what I realised over the years of being with Manpower was actually how many additional skills they gave me. They were excellent at giving training programs, and I'd spend a lot of time in London doing different sort of skills, and that really set me up working for a corporate company. And they were quite strict, but then that gave me my boundaries and sort of the rules that I like to adhere to. So that was amazing. And I spent, over 8 years working for Manpower, but then decided to have a family. So went back to work after I'd had my first son, but when it came to having my second son, I decided to give that role up. So I spent a bit of time at home with the children, and then decided after a bit of time that I needed to get back into work. Whilst I was off with the children, again, I couldn't sit still, so I I did a diploma in curtain making of all things, and worked with my dad a little bit because my dad had a painting and decorating business. So that was like me having my own little mini business in a sense, and looking after the money and the orders. But yeah, then it was time to go back to proper work. I felt like I needed to be with people again. And I saw, it was when obviously jobs were in the local press, I saw this job to work at the local crematorium. And it was like, okay, that's a bit interesting. That's a bit different. And I remember saying to like my friends and my family, oh, I've applied for a job at the crematorium. And they were like, why? Why do you want to do that? But I think it boiled down to sort of in retail, being face to face with people and helping people. It was actually, that's very different, and maybe I can help make a difference. So that was how I got into, if you like, the start of sort of the funeral industry, working for the local authority, being involved with the crematorium. And again, I went into that role. It was part-time because my children were small and at school, but I ended doing extra hours. I was keen. I wanted to learn more. You know, my brain was like a sponge. It was like, you know, what else can I learn in this role? It's so interesting. And the more people I helped, the more I wanted to do. So I spent, again, I think it was around 6 years at the crematorium. And obviously that was how we met. And then, I guess we started to have discussions then around, what difference could we make if we actually opened our own funeral home? We started to understand where maybe there were areas where we could have something that was very special as our funeral homes. And that's how I got into it. But, if you'd asked me in the 80s, Nicola, you'll be running funeral homes in the future, I would have just said, no chance.
So with that in mind then, what do you think was, in the transition, the biggest surprise or challenge that you came across when you made the shift into this industry from what you've been doing before?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess the biggest shift, one, the fact that we had gone self-employed, that's a big shift and quite a risk, isn't it? You've been employed by somebody and then you decide actually, we're going to go on our own. That's a huge risk because you think, well, is it going to work? Are people going to want to use our services? So I guess that was. And I think, when you go into a role that you have to be very much motivated yourself. And I think that's where I was lucky when I talked about being in the corporate world, being able to think of areas that we could put into our business, not to make it corporate, but there are areas where I'm very keen on things like health and safety, HR, making sure that we're doing things correctly, we're transparent. So I would think, those things.
So with that in mind then, and you talk about that, how do you think your previous careers have shaped your approach to the work that we do now in the funeral industry?
Retail gives you a really good stand-in for working with people face to face. And, at times you've got to have that patience with people. And I think, that's what we bring to our business. We're dealing with people face to face. We're dealing with people who maybe have challenges in the fact that they're very upset. So there's a lot of patience, around what we do. Showing empathy to people. I think as well, certainly working for Manpower that was very strict and, there were sort of guidelines, in terms of funeral homes. And I think this goes for anybody that works in a funeral home. On the surface, everybody looks very serene and very calming. But underneath, there's so much paperwork to do. There's time limits. There's factors to make sure that we're getting things done on time. External things that sometimes delay things. So, it's all of that, making sure that everything works in conjunction with something else. And I think, all of that I've definitely brought. And, other areas, in terms of numbers and finance and things like that, us having our own business, we've had to look at all those areas as well. So, there's lots of different factors.
Okay. Totally flipping it onto a totally different subject.
Okay.
So if we talk about us and a partnership in a business.
Yeah.
What's it really like working as husband and wife? We get asked this question loads of times.
We do.
In what we class as an emotionally demanding profession. How do you feel we as a couple get on, and does it have any negative impacts because of what we do?
Okay. Right. Okay, so you are right. We do get asked this question a lot. Oh gosh, how do you work with your husband so much? And I think, in the early days, if I'm honest, there were a couple of times where things were a little bit prickly between us because tensions were a bit high. We wanted it to work. And I do know there was a couple of occasions where, maybe I bit back at you and you bit back at me. But I think on the whole, and I do feel that we do have a really special relationship when it comes to working together. And it really does work for us too. And I think, when one of us is up, the other one might be down a bit. When one of us is down, the other one is up. So we do work it very well together in that sense, don't we? But I also, like I also say to a lot of people, being a bit flippant, we don't see each other a lot when we're at work, do we?
Oh.
Because when I'm in one office, you're in another one, or you're out on a funeral, or, so we don't see a lot of each other. So maybe that's why, why it works, because we're not together a lot.
No,
really,
we're polar opposites as well, really, aren't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. But, and again, I guess, where when we come home on an evening, we realise it's not a 9-to-5 role, this. And we may come home and we're still talking about work. And I know for some people they would say, well, maybe that's not healthy. But I think for us, because we're not together, it's nice to come home and to chat about what's happened during the day, or what's going on, or how we're feeling about something. And I think that's really healthy for us too. And I know when we've gone out for meals and stuff, we'll start talking about the business or what's happening, but they're the times when we maybe have some really good ideas about what we want to do as well. So yeah, we do talk about the business a lot and what's happening and the team, because there is so much going on, but I do believe it works.
So in what used to be a really male-dominated environment in the funeral industry,
yeah,
do you think being a woman in this industry brings a different perspective on how we support families through this journey of grief?
Yeah, I do. And I guess, when I came into this industry, as when we started our own business, it was a bit of an eye-opener to understand how this business works. And I think, how this industry works, should I say, because from the roles and jobs I've had in the past, and from the 80s, there has been that sense that women have got more into job roles. I came into the funeral industry and really realised that actually the funeral industry was nowhere near modern times. And I think there's been a lot of things have had to change over the years. I think, when we started in business, still the model role there was that a funeral director and the bearers were all male. Whereas now, within our team, we've got female funeral directors. We've got females that go out on funerals, which is amazing to see. And, why should females not get involved more? They've got the strength to do it. If they've got the communication, and they can show that empathy. Dare I say, sometimes probably a little bit more than maybe a man can, especially if it's to another man, that's maybe grieving. But yeah, there's definitely a place for women in this industry. And I think we've noticed over the years as well, when we recruit, we do get more females coming forward, especially for like the funeral director roles, don't we?
Definitely.
Rather, more than men. But obviously we will look at people, whether they're male or female, as to who we recruit. But, we do have a great mix. And yeah, there is definitely a place for females.
I agree. So, talking about us two again, what do you think are some strengths you think we each bring to the business, and how do you think they complement each other? I know we've talked there a little bit about how different we are and we're polar opposites, but we each bring different things into this business.
Yeah.
And never the two sort of cross really, do they? And if
No.
they do, we have to have conversation about how and why they cross.
Yeah.
But what do you think the split is between the two of us? What strengths does one bring over another?
Okay, so I think, like we often say to each other, and probably this is why we feel the businesses work, because we are very different people. And I think that sort of set itself out when we first set up in business and we started to understand and realise where we both would fit into this business. And I think it's probably important for people to know that I have never funeral directed. I am not the funeral director within this business, because I never saw that as my role. And it wasn't really something that I wanted to get involved in. I think for me, I am more logistics. I like to deal with the HR, the marketing, and that side. And I am very much keen on people and culture. So that's, I think, where my sort of strengths lie. And I think for you, obviously, it was always going to be, because you are the funeral director, so that was always going to be your side of things, dealing with the funeral side and the mortuary side, and obviously training up the funeral directors that we now have, and you know, the mortuary technicians. So I think it was always, again, strangely, the business sort of showed us the way in terms of what we would both do. And I have full respect, as you know, for you on the funeral side, and I would never really question anything on that, because that is not the area that I have any expertise in. And I think you feel the same, or I know you would never dare question my side.
Never, I wouldn't chance it, no.
But yeah, I just think it just seems to work, doesn't it? It's just naturally how it has become. I think there's been times when we've both maybe looked at something and said, we both maybe don't agree with each other, but then, you know, we compromise, don't we? Or we talk to each other around, well, why do you think that? Why do I think that? And then, yeah, I would normally win.
Majority of the time, yeah. We'll let you think that you win majority of the time. Okay, so behind the scenes, Nicola, tell the people that are listening to this, how do you deal with the emotion? What's like your coping mechanism? How do you deal with that?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I am quite an emotional person, to be honest, which will probably come out in some of these podcasts. So yeah, I think, you know, we've encompassed this team where we have amazing support for each other. So I think, you know, any of the team I know I could go to. If there was something emotional that I was dealing with, if it was to do, you know, with something that's happened in the funeral home, as much as I would think the team would feel the same, because we are really close. Obviously, I've got you, haven't I? So, you know, and we talk a lot, don't we? And I think in the early days when I was learning to understand the funeral home side of things, because, you know, the crematorium and funeral homes are very different. So for me to start understanding how to deal with my emotions, because, you know, you are at that raw forefront when, you know, somebody's lost somebody, you know, whether that's them ringing to speak to you over the phone or just even walking into the office. And those initial words are, you know, my dad's passed away or my mum's passed away, you know, and to see their, you know, how they're dealing with that, you know, it is upsetting. And, you know, trying not to take that on board can sometimes be really hard. And I think, you know, there's been a couple of times where I've had to take myself, after I've dealt with a family, I've had to take myself out of the office just to catch my breath. You know, it's always very difficult when it's a child that's passed away and we're dealing with a family. So, yeah, you've got to have those mechanisms. But I guess the main one is it's communicating, isn't it, with the team and communicating with you.
Mm. Can you think of one thing that, one moment in time in your time working in this industry that stuck with you and changed how you view work or how you view the work that you do? Is there anything that's made you think, right, I'm not doing it like that. From now on, I'm doing it like this?
I would think there's probably quite a few things, because coming from the crematorium where there was a lot of red tape, and that was one of the reasons why we set up on our own, wasn't it? Was so that we could. I mean, we often say we don't want to say no. The answer will always be yes to people. As long as it's not illegal or wrong. We want to help, and there's always a way. We say, don't we?
Definitely. So, say we've got a process that we've had for a long time, and we think it's the right way of doing things, and then something happens on a particular day that thinks we need to rip that process up and we need to find a new way of doing things because that was an old way of doing it.
Well, yeah, and I think we do that virtually on a daily basis.
Every day.
Because we evolve with change, don't we? Things are changing, and I think especially in the funeral industry, because there's been so much has gone on over the last year in terms of legalities and things that definitely need to change in this industry, without a doubt. So, yeah, and I think because it's our business, we can change things quickly, and the team get on board with that, don't they? To make changes for the better for families, to make sure that we are doing things correctly and right.
So that leads me nicely into my last question for you today.
Okay.
So, to put you on the spot,
Oh dear.
if you could change one thing about the funeral industry today, for whatever reason, what would it be and why would that be?
I would think regulation. I mean, we've always said, haven't we, from day one when we started, and it was so important when we started that we were part of a governing body, the National Association of Funeral Directors. We wanted that accountability. We wanted people to come in from that body, to look at our premises, to look at our people, and to basically review what we do, so that we are fully transparent. Sadly, and this is where the funeral industry has fallen down over this last year, is that, funeral homes, people do not have to be regulated, so anybody could set up at the current moment, and that is just so wrong. That there has to be some accountability and some regulation to this industry to stop things like what happened in Hull a couple of years ago and Legacy, because that is not how I would say most funeral homes run and shouldn't run. There has to be that transparency, and people need to trust funeral directors and funeral homes. So, yeah, no doubt, that has to change.
Yeah, you've answered that great. Thank you. I'm going to leave it there today. So,
Thank you.
I've had a great chat with you. Thank you ever so much for that, and we'll catch you all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Just Talk Funerals.
We really care about what you think. We'd love your feedback on the subjects raised today, or maybe you have a question you would like us to talk about in a future episode. You can contact us by emailing podcast@threadgoldfunerals.com.
If you'd like to know more about what we do and the services we offer, then please head to jasonthreadgoldfuneraldirector.com. Thank you for joining us today, and see you next time.